Canada is awesome. A little book about a big country by me, Neil Pasricha. Do you remember bank calendars? When I was younger, my sister Nina and I always waited in the long line for tellers with my dad at the big Royal Bank in downtown Oshawa, Ontario. We'd spend time begging my dad for a coffee crisp from the hasty market next door, a handful of sour chews from the candy machines, or maybe one of those foil wrapped, chocolate covered mints sitting up at the counter. The ones you'd rip apart as dozens of tiny chocolate islands broke off the mainland and stretched across the pasty white minty sea, expanding between your fingers. I remember being surprised those minty chocolates were sold by the Royal Canadian Legion. Why chocolates? Was it just a way to keep their boxes full for the 11 months of the year where they weren't full of poppies? You had to love the Legion's quarter-in-a-box POS system, too. How Canadian? Go on and have one. Just leave something if you got something, eh? For me, those boxes brought back memories of unmanned stands selling eggs, lilac bouquets, or jars of honey on 2-lane highways to Sandbanks or Wasaga Beach. Nina and I would swing under the felt ropes, fingernail scratch $1,000,000 withdrawals on those thin triplicate pink, white, green carbon papers, and sometimes reorganize the wall of pamphlets with names like Open an RRSP, The Power of Canada Savings Bonds, or Get a New Royal Bank Visa today. Most pamphlets showed a husband and wife grinning at each other at their kitchen table. I remember thinking they'd probably sell a lot more credit cards if it was like a mom with sweaty bangs holding 2 red, white, and green plastic bags outside the entrance of the bay at Christmas. Bank lines were a regular and uneventful part of our lives. Unless it was the one day of the year where we were handed a new bank calendar for next year. I can still feel the excitement of holding next year's calendar for the first time. It was like holding a lightning bolt. We were going to be staring at this thing on our kitchen wall all year, every soccer practice, every birthday party, every dentist appointment. So it was by far and away the most critical piece of technology in our entire home. After walking through the bank's shoveled parking lot, my dad would pull open the door to the rear-facing back seat in our wood-paneled Pontiac Parisienne, and we'd hop in and start flipping through the calendar on the drive to A&P. Our eyes popped at misty rainbows over Niagara Falls, snow-capped peaks smeared like icing over mountains, and tiny people walking on Bay of Fundy floors. We stared at evergreens standing silent behind mirrory Algonquin lakes, red and yellow leaf-covered drives on twisting Cape Breton roads, and a fading sun setting over the Toronto skyline, years before they built the Sky Dome. We flipped past totem poles of Stanley Park at sunset, chalky blue Lake Louise waters lying tranquil between mountains, and the majestic Chateau Frontenac looming over a frozen Quebec City. We gazed at mossy boulders beside deep blue lakes, giant redwoods on Vancouver Island, and nearly neon green grasses rolling over lush Prince Edward Island hills. Never forget how lucky we are, my dad would remind us as he steered from A&P to Harvey's. Never forget how good we have it. All those pictures are from your own country. Canada is the land of opportunity. It's the best country in the world, and you get to live here. It took me a long time to realize my dad was right. I guess he would know. My dad was born Surinder Kumar Pasricha in 1944 in a small village called Taran Taran in Punjab in India, and he grew up in a small house on a sandy side street, sharing a tiny bedroom with 3 brothers and a sister. He was 3 when his mom died, and his aging grandmother came to teach the kids to scrimp, save, and study for the next 20 years. They had 1 slate board for homework and bought an egg maybe once a week. Once a week? I'd ask. They were 5 rupees each, he'd say. At night, my dad worked long hours ironing at his father's Singer sewing machine shop, helping his dad stay on the sales floor, pressing shirts in the back. While doing his master's in nuclear physics at the University of New Delhi, he applied for immigration and was accepted in 1968. Why Canada? I asked him. It was a newer country. It was more opportunities at that time, and my brother was there, so I thought that was a good place. What about Sweden? Norway? Finland? Didn't you tell me they were number one? They were, he said. I looked up a list in school and Scandinavian were on the top, but they don't speak the language. Canada, US, Australia were the ones with English speaking, and there was a lot of teachers' demand. Okay, well then why Canada specifically, Dad? Well, he said, I got the letter back from Canada first. Our bureaucracy was faster than Australia and the United States. That was the first tipping point. My dad arrived at Toronto International Airport in 1968, 16 years before it was named after Lester B. Pearson, with a small suitcase and $8 in his pocket. Why does every immigrant come with $8? That was what the maximum rupees the Indian government allowed out of the country was worth. He got an apartment in Scarborough and spent the summer ripping tickets at the public pool and the beaches before being hired as the first high school physics teacher in the Durham Board of Education. Ontario had just split science into its biology, chemistry, and physics subcomponents, so, according to my dad, they simply needed people to teach physics because they never taught it to anybody before. And my dad wanted to embrace every aspect of his new country. Some family and friends lived on Gerrard Street or out in Brampton near some emerging Indian restaurants, temples, and shops, and he certainly loved samosas from Moti Mahal and burfi from Brar Sweets, but my dad preferred his own version of heading into the unknown, and he moved to Oshawa, where he lived as one of a handful of visible minorities in a blue-collar GM town half an hour east of the big city, with large populations of immigrants from Ukraine, Italy, Portugal, France, Romania, Germany, Poland, and Greece. My dad started eating beef, going on school canoe trips, and chaperoning dances, where a few years later he was swirling and twirling my mom at twice the speed of everyone else. In his frilly baby blue dress shirt, dark velvet jacket, and big smile, his boxy glasses flashing rainbow reflections from the disco ball. My dad bought our first Sears Christmas tree with the spray-painted prongs telling us where on the forest green broomstick trunk we should poke all the branches. My dad hosted birthday parties at Burger King where me and my friends Jason Hopgood and Jason Daigle toured the slippery orange-tiled kitchen before swiveling on tan chairs wearing paper gold crowns. He took us tobogganing at the golf course a few years after seeing snow. My dad didn't know what he was doing, but he knew he wanted to try. I think my dad's sense of curiosity and wonder with Canada rubbed off on my sister and me. Never forget how lucky we are. Never forget how good we have it. My dad was right, and there are so many reasons why. So many things that make Canada, Canada. Where do we begin? Maybe it all starts with those blue puddles on our map. They're in half the calendar photos for good reason. Turns out the last ice age ripped more than 2 million lakes into our fabric, and they're filled with the world's largest supply of fresh water. No big deal, but most sources say we have more lakes than every country in the world combined. We have 20% of the world's fresh water. Sure, the definition of lake is vague, and much of our fresh water isn't exactly accessible. But the point is, we are completely surrounded everywhere by the ingredient most precious and vital to our existence. We are the second largest country in the world after Russia. But did you know we have the longest coastline? 243,042 kilometers. And the most islands? 52,455 of them. And did you know we have the biggest island in a lake? Manitoulin Island in Lake Huron, which is 2,766 kilometers squared, and that on that island there are over 100 other lakes, and that on one of those lakes, Lake Mindamoya, which is 39 kilometers square, pretty big, is an island called Treasure Island, which is 0.4 kilometers squared, which is officially, yes, the world's largest island on a lake, on an island on a lake. So much water, so many islands, including Baffin Island, which is the fifth largest island in the world, between Madagascar at number 4 and Sumatra at number 6. Not to mention Victoria Island, which is the eighth largest island in the world, right between Honshu at number 7 and Great Britain at number 8. We are also heavily crowned ear to ear by the Pacific Ocean, Arctic Ocean, and Atlantic Ocean. And we even have Hudson's Bay, clocking in at a near unfathomable 1,230,000 kilometers squared, 5 times the Great Lakes combined, which makes it the second largest bay in the world after that cocky Bay of Bengal. Water, water everywhere. So many drops to drink. We forget this all the time. Have you ever drank bottled water all week on some WestJet all-inclusive to Punta Cana, Cancun, or Veradero, and then found yourself marveling as you filled up a glass at your kitchen sink when you got home? Me too. I remember pushing the black rubbery foot rail on the big floor-standing school bathroom sink at Sunset Heights Public School in Oshawa, with all the boys giggling and drinking from the sprinklers, showering water into our tiny cupped hands. We trust the water. We drink the water. We live by the water. We vacation by the water. This is such deep, primal pleasure, and it's right in front of us, inside us, beside us, all the time. We watch creeks freeze and thaw as our tiny spinning planet tilts on its axis every year. And since we're smacked way, way up top, we feel those tilts in the form of dramatically changing seasons. And I really do mean up top, by the way. The 45th parallel is halfway between the equator and North Pole, and 98% of Canada is above it. If you look at the 45th parallel down south, only the bottom of New Zealand and a smidge of Chile and Argentina can potentially relate to our dramatically changing seasons. 2 million lakes changing every year, 40 million Canadians changing every year. Our seasons are invisible, but they create so many endless pleasures. Orange skies burning as winds whisper on chilly October walks home from school. Sun dipping down in the distance and dogs barking behind backyard fences as your hair blows wildly in the crisping breeze. Flurries floating past street lamps and snowflakes sticking on lashes as we mitten swipe picnic tables at the park. Everything slowing into an eerily pitch-perfect silence under shadowy sheets of bright white. Pine trees swaying softly, Christmas lights flickering, and biting air scraping our frosty cheeks. Finding long-lost lip balms and shrunken clementines and windbreakers, and smelling freshly cut grass as mowers shave yellow winter beards in the backyard. Twilight's lengthening and toddlers racing on tipsy trikes with big kids cruising on wobbly bikes before stars pop out to twinkle and glow. Scrunching sand on the beach, lapping water at the dock, sprinklers on burning driveways, stomping on dry, crunchy leaves, holding hot mugs and warm toques. We feel the joy of our seasons deeply because we're given the chance to miss our weather. We deprive ourselves of silently paddling past baby loons on their parents' backs on humid summer mornings while we're sliding along icy patches to steep tobogganing hills. And we deprive ourselves of sliding down snowy hills when we're paddling across silent lakes. This way, every single day has the potential to feel like a treat, which helps us live in the moment and see and feel every sense around us. Every single day in our country helps us live in the moment. Do you ever notice we speak in the collective? What do you think of this weather we're having? Shall we grab a Tim's before the meeting? Think we have a shot at the playoffs? We use the word we so much. Why do we feel like such a collective? I don't think it's complicated. I think it's because we are one. We all toss half of everything we make into a big glass jar and we use it to pay for everyone's healthcare, education, and services. Sure, the system's never perfect, but if you shatter your ankle in an icy Canadian Tire parking lot, need a dozen years of free school for 5 kids in Kamloops, or want to drive on freshly snowplowed roads from Comox to Calgary to Cornwall to Côte Nord to Cape Spear, well, we got you. We got you. We got everyone. When we know the bottom isn't going to fall out, we have less fear in our hearts, and we aren't living a bracing existence of revving engines, stashing weapons, and putting up our dukes. Take as many comic books as your kid needs from the library, stroll through the park grasses you just helped mow, and feel free to call 911 after your son sets his bedroom curtains on fire with his giant bong. Bong fires, of course, being one major downside of becoming just the second country in the world to legalize cannabis in 2018, after Uruguay in 2013, before 5 more up to today. Can we call ourselves one of the world's progressive pioneers? We were the third country to get universal free at point of service healthcare in 1966, after Germany in 1883, the UK in 1948, before France, Australia, and 5 others up to today. We're fourth in the world to legalize gay marriage in 2005, after the Netherlands, Belgium, and Spain, before 29 others up to today, only 29 others. And fifth in the world to legalize assisted dying in 2015, after the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Colombia, before 4 other countries up to today. I'm saying we all throw half our money in the big glass jar. Some love the jar, some hate the jar. Do we all find ourselves complaining about the jar and thinking about the jar at different times? I would argue either way, the jar creates a sense of connection, community, and a certain all in this togetherness that you don't find many other places. We take care of each other, educate each other, support each other. We encourage each other, help each other, heal each other. We pay for afternoon storytelling on public radio, support film festivals in any town with a couple projectors in the side of a barn, and help musicians, writers, and filmmakers fund their magnum opus. We are also the most educated country in the world, with the highest percentage of our population completing tertiary education, which is just a fancy word for what comes after primary and secondary. Wait, did I just say we're number one? Yes, we are. We are the most educated country in the whole world. And we never even talk about this. But it's true. A somewhat mind-boggling 63% of Canadians have completed a diploma or a degree after high school. And just for perspective, South Korea is number 4 at 53%. Ireland is number 3 at 54%. Japan is number 2 at 56%. By the way, the global average is 6%. Today, more than 20 million Canadians have a piece of paper saying that after primary school and secondary school, they didn't stop. They just kept going and going and going and going and going. They went deeper for 3, 4, 5, even a dozen extra years. Shout out to anesthesiologists on absolutely everything you could imagine going deep on. Because how do you get really good at something? You go deep. How do you become best class, top class, world class? By going deep. And how do you go deep? By studying animation at Sheridan, engineering at Waterloo, hospitality at George Brown, winemaking at Niagara, underwater vehicles at Memorial, jazz at McGill, game design at Vancouver Film School, emergency management at Sheridan, classics at Dow, l'histoire at Laval, commerce at Queen's, business at Western, aerospace at Carleton, arts at OCAD, literature at Windsor, vet medicine at Guelph, naturopathic medicine at York, mining at Laurentian, nuclear engineering at Ontario Tech, medicine at U of T or the Caymans, publishing at TMU or Ryerson, paramedics at Sask Polytech, nursing at U of M, Manitoba, agro at U of S, Saskatchewan, petroleum engineering at U of A, Alberta, railcraft conducting at SAIT in Calgary, aircraft maintenance at BCIT, forestry at UBC, or even flying planes up in Sault Ste. Marie. This isn't even 1% of what's offered here, and to what can we attribute our top global marks? Our historically generous investments in public school? Our double-degreed teachers? Our constant immigrant influx? Are we just selecting the studiest from the best and brightest applying here every year? Could be. Maybe. Who knows? But I want to propose something. I think maybe our best in world education rates are a function of our long and deep cultural history of learning, growing, and reading. Did you know Canadians read the second most books per year? Yet, other than our Icelandic pals who read 20 books a year, our 17 books a year is tops. We're ahead of the super readers in Finland, number 3 with 16, and fellow readers and leaders in Norway, Estonia, New Zealand, Australia, England, and the US, who are all around about a dozen. But the point is, we love books. We know reading is the pathway to almost everything else. Margaret Atwood, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale, reminds us books are a uniquely portable magic. Mordecai Richler, who wrote Barney's Virgin, cautions that you don't have to burn books to destroy culture, you just get people to stop reading them. And Robertson Davies, who wrote Fifth Business, imparts the Canadian value that a room without books is like a body without a soul. Amen. I believe this. I'm guessing you do too. You are watching or listening to me reading a book right now. You know one of our long gone elders who we should thank? Thomas Carey. C-A-R-Y. Carey. Thomas Carey opened the very first Canadian bookstore in 1797 in Quebec City on Rue de la Fabrique. The format of the store was like a local lending library where readers could subscribe and enjoy the use of a periodical room from 10 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. How Canadian. Do your morning things, do your evening things, but if you can, in the middle, sneak off and read. Thomas Carey's deep Canadian bookstore spirit continues across our country today, with a thriving Munro's in Victoria, established in 1963, Kids Books in Vancouver, established 1983, Audrey's in Edmonton, established 1975, McNally Robinson in Winnipeg, established 1981, The Bookshelf in Guelph, established 1973, Glad Day in Toronto, established 1970, Argo Bookshop in Montreal, established 1966, La Maison Anglaise in Quebec City, established 1984, or The Bookman in Charlottetown, established 1972. Just a handful of the over 300 and growing independent bookstores coast to coast to coast. And let's not forget Mighty Indigo, established 1994, spearheaded by Montreal-born septuagenarian Heather Reisman, chief book lover Heather Reisman, who has filled her 100% Canadian-owned 172-store chain with Heather's Picks tables, local author signings, and Saturday morning readings for over 30 years. And of course, Indigo has the deep history of bringing Chapters, 1992, established, and Coles, established in 1940, into its national reading push. By the way, with Indigo and our indies, we have a majority Canadian-owned book market, despite great competition from the U.S. powerhouses. What a feat! For perspective, even England's largest chain, Waterstones, is owned by an American private equity company. Canadian-owned, Canadian-led bookstores with their delightful staff pick walls and passionate booksellers like Sarah at Another Story, Kyle at Type, or Stephen at The Monkey's Paw, they help reflect stories back to us that continually help us grow and see ourselves. Our Irish mate David Mitchell, who wrote Cloud Atlas, reminds us that booksellers are doctors of the mind. Water, seasons, learning, reading, all part of what makes us us. And how do we pay for all this? The big glass jar. And it is big. Some say high tax rates curb our ambition. We say it doesn't. Some say high tax rates limit our ability to produce at the greatest possible economic productivity. We say it does. We say go ahead and crunch your spreadsheets showing who has the highest GDP per capita. We'll be at the cottage drinking Moosehead. I mean, sure, we understand measuring some success with productivity. After all, we are ambitious. We are a nation of creators, makers, and builders. We invented the telephone and insulin and the zipper and the pacemaker and instant replay and garbage bags and the snowmobile and IMAX and paint rollers and time zones and batteries and the caulking gun and carbon dating and JavaScript and the Wonder Bra and the electron microscope. I'm just saying, we are ambitious, but we don't need maximum productivity. Maybe we're okay being 16th in the world in GDP per capita at $51,000 per person. And zooming in, we see there are 193 countries on the world's highest productivity list, and the top is dominated by tiny peopled corporate hotspots like Luxembourg, Macau, and Brunei, all of whom have populations under 700,000 people. So we're educated, remember? We know it's gamed. Feels like we're okay being 90th instead of 99th percentile on that one. Canadians know success doesn't always show up in rankings and graphs. Wealth isn't just how much we create, make, or build. Wealth is also having a half dozen friends we can call to help us move. Knowing when we're too old to shovel our driveway, a kid on our street will help us out. And feeling sure everybody at work will smile when you say you're taking off early to catch your kid's soccer game. There's a reason I wish I hadn't worked so hard as one of the top 5 regrets of the dying. We don't work ourselves to death in Canada because our system sets a high baseline of health, education, clean water, and good government. We also pay parents to be off for a year after having a baby since nothing's more important to us than raising future Canadians. Sure, we're welcome to make more if we have the vision, feel the drive, or crave the spoils. Sure, and many of us will, and many of us do. But we don't mistake non-optimal efficiency for any kind of nationwide deficiency. Plus, we can sniff out other places counting things we count, like the United Nations Human Development Index, which ladles in life expectancy, education, and income. On that, we're 15th. Or the OECD Better Life Index, which folds in work-life balance, community, and the environment. On that one, we're 9th. Creating, making, building. We're getting into Canadian values now, below the skin and into the muscle. Creating, making, building. Can we extend those into drive, grit, determination? I think we can. I think most of us know our Canadian values are deeply forged. Our land, our water, our changing seasons, our messy, murky, mixing origins, our strength and little steps to big steps ways, our collectivism, our togetherness, the big glass jar, and things like our sacred Medicare, public broadcasting, and 2 hands under each other's feet boosts over life's many fences. I think stirring values together results in something like a spirit. Is there a spiritual essence of Canada we might point to that ties us together in an invisible way? I think there is. I'm sure there are many. But for me, one story, arguably our strongest Canadian folk story, epitomizes so much of Canadian beliefs and spirit. I am, of course, talking about Terry Fox. The sound of Terry's footsteps are the heartbeat of our nation. This is the man who died running across Canada on one leg, who ran a marathon every day for 183 days, who took nothing for himself, who accepted no sponsors, who gave it all to cancer research. Terry Fox was born in Winnipeg in 1958. His family moved to Surrey, British Columbia when he was 8, and Terry showed resilience early. Told he was too short for his high school basketball team, he took up cross-country skiing as his coach suggested, and then showed up at basketball again next year. He eventually made the team, and in grade 12 won his high school's Athlete of the Year. Terry went to Simon Fraser University, SFU, up in the Foggy Mountains to study kinesiology and become, his goal, a gym teacher. At age 18, Terry was diagnosed with bone cancer and very suddenly had his leg amputated 15 centimeters above his knee before being outfitted with a stiff plastic leg. It would grind and make his stump bleed in painful walks or runs. Runs? Yes. A wise nurse moved 18-year-old Terry to the children's ward, and he spent the next year getting treatment with young children who filled his heart. I'm crying now because there's somebody right here going through the same thing I went through, the same thing, and he's only 10 years old, Terry said at the time. And I had the most inspirational day of my life today. Terry spent a year doing in-depth planning for a run across Canada to raise money for cancer research. Doesn't cancer research get a lot of money? Nope, not 45 years ago. It was a disease you hid back then, like leprosy, schizophrenia, or AIDS. Terry was told by doctors the chances of him living from his cancer were 15% a couple of years before, but thanks to research, it was now 50%. Terry was blown away. He wanted to bring cancer out of the shadows. But how? By running across Canada to raise awareness and money. Did anybody run on plastic prosthetic legs then? No. The stump chafed. It grinded. It bled. The pain was intense. But Terry felt like he had nothing to lose. He was just told he had a 50% chance of surviving. I was told all my life I'm not the biggest, not the fastest, not the strongest, not the smartest, Terry told his brother Fred at the time. But he had Canadian drive, grit, determination. Terry's plan was to run from Newfoundland to Vancouver Island on a self-proclaimed marathon of hope, with the goal of running a literal marathon every day on his leg. He wrote letters to every company he could think of asking for donations. Ford donated a camper van. Imperial Oil donated gas. Adidas donated running shoes. He turned down any company asking him to endorse products because he didn't want anyone to profit from his run, including, of course, him. Terry began by famously dipping his prosthetic limb in the Atlantic Ocean with the goal of dipping his foot in the Pacific Ocean when he got to the other side. His journey lasted 187 days. He said he wanted to raise $1 million. And nobody paid attention. There was no crowds in Newfoundland, no press coverage. Just an endless empty highway. Terry ran through Newfoundland sleet, Newfoundland hail, Newfoundland winds. How much did he run on one leg every day? 42 kilometers every day. He let anybody run with him who wanted to. And he kept raising his goals as the tension started building. He started calling into CBC radio every week. When he passed through one town of 10,000 people, he suddenly raised $10,000. And then Terry changed his goal from $1 million to $24 million. His new idea was raising $1 for each of the 24 million Canadians. Some said he was stitching the country together. My parents went to see Terry running through Oshawa on July 9th, 1980, when I was 9 months old. And from July to September 1st that year, he kept going and ran from Oshawa all the way to Thunder Bay. Only 1,424 kilometers. On top of how far he'd already come, Terry was at 5,373 kilometers when the cancer suddenly spread to his lungs and forced him to stop. 5 months later, in February, as our nation cheered his recovery, Terry reached his expanded goal as his Marathon of Hope hit a total of $24.17 million. Terry Fox died. I'm crying as I say this and I read this. Terry Fox died in June of 1981. He was 22. I never knew Terry Fox, but I know Terry Fox. We all do. I feel his reverence and echoes of his words gone by. I am only one member of the Marathon of Hope, he said. I am equal with all of you. I am equal with all of you. 45 years later, my children do the Terry Fox run every year at school. Terry's brother, Fred Fox, came to speak in their tiny gym. And before she died, Terry's mom, Betty Fox, spoke to over 400,000 100,000 Canadian school children across 25 years of crisscrossing the country in her son's footsteps. By the way, how many schools did the Terry Fox run last year? 9,233. And how much did they raise last year? 24 million. With corporate sponsors? Nope, none, never. Just like I got no ads on my podcast and no ads on my YouTube channel. I've unplugged all that stuff because that wasn't Terry's wish. So it's always been respected. Terry's runs are independent and run by volunteers, and today they have now raised almost $1 billion, over 900 million and counting, tying a country together, the heartbeat of our nation. Our relationship with equality, egalitarianism, and the big glass jar runs deep. We work hard, we do. And we love our off time, too. For us and for our country. Because we know more downtime also means more garage bands playing covers at the corner pub, more stalls of homemade hot sauces at the farmer's market, more well-written newspapers in more small towns, more community meetings with full chairs at the library, and more people having time to fix bikes, spray paint murals, or play banjos on subway platforms, searching, finding, and sharing beauty. When my dad used to say, it's a free country, he wasn't talking about the taxes. He meant this is a place where you can live where you want, marry who you please, talk about what you like, and watch anything on TV. We're welcome to pray when we want, where we want, if we want. Temples, churches, mosques, synagogues, gurdwaras, forests, even pulling a mat from the trunk of your Uber and getting down on your knees on the sidewalk. We preach curiosity, acceptance, and kindness here. We know everybody can fine-tune our neighborhoods, cultures, and subcultures to their tastes. Speaking of tastes, with so much diversity, a town in Canada could easily have samosas, shawarma, and ceviche on the same corner. But we enjoy other very Canadian treats too, like Nanaimo bars, chocolate coconut icing squares, poutine, hot salty fries covered in gooey cheese curds and steamy dark gravy, butter tarts, melted brown sugar with raisins poured into greasy pastry, Montreal smoked meat, salted cured steamed brisket served with mustard on rye bread, and of course, ketchup chips. Ketchup chips. This doesn't even include the dozen varieties of indigenous craft dinner. A beautiful collection of millions of lakes smeared across the second largest country in the world, playing 4 seasons and 4 acts every year, feeding the world from a tap of educated people, all living under a warm blanket of values like drive, grit, determination, egalitarianism. Come on! Where did this paradise come from? How did we get here? We're talking about what makes Canada Canada, but what made Canada Canada in the first place? Logically, we must first look to answer that question by turning to the Heritage Canada TV commercials. Do you remember those? When I was a kid, there was one sharing the story of James Naismith getting a hole cut in a peach basket so he could teach people how to play his newly invented basketball. One of Laura Secord running through fields to warn the Brits of an American attack in 1812, and one of Joe Shuster racing down a station platform to catch his train to Toronto after giving his girlfriend Lois his first ever drawing of Superman. Then there was the Heritage Canada commercial about how Canada became Canada. The commercial takes place in the forest. It's the early 1500s, and a bearded blue beret, Jacques Cartier, comes over a hill with robes and scarves sweeping majestically across his body in slow motion. He's surrounded by a group of fellow French explorers and an old dude who looks like the Quaker oatmeal man. Then a group of leathery, dark-skinned natives with feathers in their long black hair also step into the clearing to meet them. They have wide eyes and hold tomahawks. What looks like the tense build-up for a forest bloodbath soon dissolves into a simple French garçon asking for some directions at the corner of Birch and Maple. After the native says something in an Iroquoian dialect, the French Cartier asks the Quaker oatmeal guy, in impeccable English, "What's he saying, father?" Father replies, "Commander Cartier, he is saying this nation's name is Canada." The native man replies, and we read the subtitles, "Kanata, yes, the village." Then, and this is the big moment. Cartier squints, looks into the sun, and in a flag stabbing into the moon type moment, he proudly declares, Canada. Suddenly, a guy wearing a toque in Cartier's posse, who looks like he used to play drums for Broken Social Scene, pops over Cartier's shoulder and says, "Beg pardon, sir, but the word he used, I think he really means that village down there." Quaker Oatmeal Man gets huffy. "No, no, believe me, I know the word, and it means nation, and Canada is its name." The natives nod in confusion and say Kanata and begin leading Cartier down to a village of teepees forming Stadacona, which is modern-day Quebec City. As the commercial fades to black, we hear the drummer say, "But I'm sure it means the houses, the village." The message is clear. Canada is named after a misunderstanding. The native man was talking about a village, the noun for village, and Cartier thought it was the proper name of the whole region. That's still many Canadians' view of how Canada was named. I remember my grade 10 history teacher describing it as a very Canadian way for us to get our name. England, she said, is land of Angle tribes. India is land of Hindus, which were called Indus. Russia is land of the Rus people who settled in the 9th century. Canada is a misunderstanding. However, a more recent investigation into Jacques Cartier's own diaries reveals that the famed explorer actually understood the word perfectly. He knew Canada meant village, and in his own journals, titled Bref Recite, he called the land Canada because, as he wrote, they call a town Canada, and his earliest name for the wider territory in his journals is Le Pays de Canadas, plural, which means the land of Canadas, or simply the land of villages. Where do indigenous cultures fit in? Weren't they here first, and didn't French and then British colonialists smother and then methodically destroy their cultures as part of the endless global parade of landing, planting flags, and cultural genocide happening everywhere? Yes. Ugh. Yes, that is what happened. We have a dark past too. We learn about it, we read about it, we talk about it, but it's a wrestling and a reckoning that people like me, the son of immigrants who came here 50 years ago, we're working to internalize, navigate, and work through. I want to talk about it as openly as I can. So let's start with the word Canada. We were the land of villages. We are the land of villages. Explorers and fur traders adopted that name, and the villages expanded across the land. Though violence occurred, there are also reports that the French, English, and indigenous tribes worked together quite a bit, with stories of trading, living together, and swapping medicines for scurvy. There was also a new group called the Métis, which I've heard people lovingly joke showed up about 9 months after the Europeans landed. There was love, but that's not to say there wasn't also hate. It's not to say there wasn't also a violence. The world was an arguably more violent place 500 years ago, and there was fighting between tribes and the teaming up of most indigenous tribes with the French against a group that was majority Brits. This culminated in the 7-Year War, where French and English forces battled each other around the globe from 1756 to 1763. In Canada, the natives fighting with the French ultimately lost to the English. They split Canada up. Country lines were set, some Indigenous, some English, some French, and much disagreement on where those lines should be. There is no way to sugarcoat much of our brutal history in this era and beyond. Colonialism and the dominant thinking in our species for thousands of years around planting a flag and calling it yours meant existing cultures and communities were often supplanted in forms of horrifying cultural genocide. My grade 10 history textbook in the early 90s had no mention of residential schools. The 100 plus years of Canadian colonialists and churches subjugating indigenous populations to horrible conditions in distant schools where they were systemically robbed of culture, language, and traditions all the way up to the 1990s. No mention of segregated and underfunded Indian hospitals that were not phased out until the 1980s. No mention of First Nations schools on reserves being funded at half the rate of Canada until 2016. There is a learning and an unlearning many Canadians are working through now with open arms, listening ears, land acknowledgements, and exploring things like changing words to anthems, as Juno winning Julie Black sang at the NBA All Star game, Our Home on Native Land. With our National Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was active from 2008 to 2015, working towards a mutually respectful relationship between everyone who lives here. We see national events like the 2010 Vancouver Olympic Games or the 2025 swearing in of Prime Minister Mark Carney, beginning with traditional Indigenous ceremonies to mark, signify, and reflect back to us the sacred nature of a deep history we all share. These days, my kids are wearing orange shirts in kindergarten to recognize the rights of all children and to symbolically memorialize residential school survivor Phyllis Jack Webstad, who was stripped of her clothes, including the new orange shirt her grandmother had just bought her, which was never returned. More recently, Daniel Levy of Schitt's Creek took the University of Alberta's Indigenous Canada online course and encouraged others to join him. To date, over 600,000 Canadians have enrolled. It's a great start toward a relationship of mutual respect, understanding, and connection. But the name Canada, just the name part, that was 1867. From 500 year ago forest chats to writing it down 158 years ago. And by the way, there was big debate over the name. What else were we considering calling the place? Superior, Transatlantia, Aphysga. Wait, Aphysga? Yeah, somebody had the idea of putting the first letter of every background and country who had settled here together. E for England, F for France, I for Ireland, S for Scotland, G for Germany, A for Aboriginal. Was it T for terrible? Sure was. I admit I sort of like Transatlantia, though. Doesn't that sound like a superhero sonic jet who might fly around the world and poke his head into a cameo with Anana on Telefrancais? In the end, we went with Canada, and it was settled like most things by a bunch of rich white dudes in a boardroom. All distant lenses get cloudier, and there is much in our history to look back on in horror. Like our head tax on Chinese immigrants from 1885 to 1923, our refusal to accept the Kamagatu Maru ship of sick immigrants and sending them back across the ocean to slaughter in 1914, our relative spurning of Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi Germany in 1939, and our internment of Japanese Canadians during and after World War II. 1942 and on. We need to continue confronting and discussing these histories so we can learn from them, grow from them, and get better from them, use them as ways to fill the world with more kindness today. Today. Today? Today. Today, our country keeps changing. Every day, around 1,000 Canadians die. 1,000 Canadians are born and 1,000 Canadians arrive. We're up 1,000 people a day. We are a dynamic and ever-changing tribe. There are now, as of today, 41,528,680 of us, including Indian, Dutch, Chinese, Ethiopian, Pakistani, Somalian, Japanese, Australian, Sri Lankan, Filipino, Brazilian, Estonian, and so many more from every part of the world. I was in Wellington, Ontario last spring, a beautiful small town between Toronto and Ottawa on the shores of Lake Ontario. My wife and I strolled through a farmer's market of stalls and a church parking lot before my 3-year-old and I organized a game of tag with all the kids playing on the old dangerous playground equipment in the grassy waterfront park beside the parking lot. We climbed wooden bridges, swung through spider webs, across monkey bars, and ran up and down tube slides till our shirts stuck to our backs and our faces were dripping. Turns out most of the kids were children of the folks running stands at the market. One 7 or 8-year-old girl who played with us had slightly wiser eyes than the others. She laughed loud and ran fast and was careful to take care of her 3-year-old brother the whole time. When I went back to the market, I saw her sitting in a lawn chair at a booth selling homemade tabbouleh, hummus, and baba ganoush. There was a lineup of people waiting to buy mixed trays. The woman working with the girl ladled my plate full of hummus and told me she is a refugee from Syria. And isn't that the story? How did everyone else get here? Come here when you're running from something or running to something. Run here. Work hard, work for your family, work for your community. Use schools, parks, hospitals like interlocked fingers helping you over the fence. Finish your teaching degree, get a diploma in machinery, work with a group to plant some trees, and help the world with your contributions. Canada appears to be as far as you can get from the dawn of civilization. No stories from the Bible take place here. No stories from the Quran either. No scientists have found 200,000-year-old skeletons here like they have in Africa. Evolutionary scientists tell us humans and our human-like Homo ancestors have lived in Africa for 3 million years, and North America for 15,000. Every single person who is here at some point came here, running from something, running to something, and not that long ago. It was less than 15,000 years ago, a blink of an eye in our global history, that our ancestors walked or sailed down the Pacific coast from freezing East Asia. Only 1,000 years ago, Vikings arrived on a boat to Newfoundland. Only 500 years ago, the French sailed to Quebec. Only 300 years ago, the British marched up from the south. Only 50 years ago, my dad flew here from India. Only yesterday, Canadians arrived from Eritrea, Honduras, and East Timor. Today, a quarter of Canadians were born outside of Canada. Today, a quarter. That's a remarkable story about how new we still are and where we came from. Black loyalists fleeing the American Revolution, American slaves coming through the Underground Railroad, Ukrainians fleeing Stalinist famine, European Jews fleeing Nazis, Polish refugees escaping Prussian occupation, Rwandan Tutsis fleeing genocide, Tamils fleeing Sri Lankan civil war, Iraqi refugees escaping the Iraq War, Palestinians fleeing the Israeli-Arab War, Chinese refugees fleeing communist violence, Soviet Jews fleeing religious oppression, Afghans fleeing Taliban rule, Bosnian Muslims fleeing the Yugoslavian war, Hungarians fleeing the 1956 revolution, Congolese refugees fleeing dictators, Tibetans fleeing Chinese occupation, Haitians fleeing earthquakes, Americans dodging the draft, and oh, so many more. A Vietnamese refugee owns a convenience store near my house. She's told me she's worked there 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for 20 years. More than 2 full-time jobs. Raised her children right beside the Canada dry cooler. And now she says with tears in her eyes, after all those years, she proudly has a dozen grandchildren doing well all across Canada. We give people a home and we let them succeed. We're a bosom for the world to develop global citizens who rocket up and into the world. We're a talent factory, a citizen producer. We give people support, a hand, a chance, and then we let them flourish. My dad took his $8 and turned it into 50 years teaching high school, buying triplexes with his brother, and helping my cousins, his nieces, open pharmacies. Today, he's 80 and still works managing real estate properties. My mom started in the basement of the Royal York Hotel on Front Street as a bookkeeper in downtown Toronto, and a decade later, she was drafting tax laws with the Minister of Finance. Today, she's 75 and still running the books for my dad. We see musicians grow and leave, actors grow and leave, startups grow and leave, Quebec Nordiques grow and leave, inventors grow and leave, companies grow and leave. But that's part of being a developer. We develop for the world, and heaven will always have you back when you're ready. We take pride in fellow Canadians and Canadian inventions and Canadian goods, but we're not showy. Do you also find we talk about ourselves in the form of trivia? Did you know Malcolm Gladwell, The Rock, and Rachel McAdams are Canadian? Did you know peanut butter was invented in Montreal? Did you know Jim Carrey, Catherine O'Hara, and Norm Macdonald are Canadian? And John Candy and Lorne Michaels and Seth Rogen? Did you know Quebec produces more maple syrup than the rest of the world combined? But these are facts. They're just facts. They're just tiny blades of grass in the vast and growing field of our country. We celebrate the celebrity, but we should be celebrating ourselves, our endlessly emerging nation, a young country, fresh country, maybe the world's adolescence. Maybe we get painted idyllic or overly optimistic, but we are just always trying and growing and staying open to ideas. We haven't polluted our supply of fresh water. We don't have corn syrup in all our food because it's cheaper. We don't value tomorrow less than today since we're paying the hospital bill anyway, and we feel the importance of connective tissue between our moving parts. A wonderful place to raise a family, a wonderful place to find great friends, forever curious, forever searching, never forgetting how lucky we are, never forgetting how good we have it. We balance being ambitious on raising families, helping each other, and building businesses. I met a friend years ago at a community event called TEDx Toronto, and he went on to lead the Toronto office of thousands of people for many years of a big Canadian technology company who helps the world find easier ways to start their own online businesses. I met a group of Torontonians who started a sauna and cold plunge space to build community and mental health. They built two in Toronto that got so popular, they're now opening in New York and down the East Coast. A friend on my street dresses up like a duck all day, and he walks around as a street artist who makes a living from selling hats and t-shirts. I was visiting him on his front porch last week when he introduced me to his wife Camilla, who came to Canada from Brazil before the pandemic. They told me she was playing violin in Sao Paulo and had been considering singing opera. While listening to 96.3 FM, the local Toronto classical music station, her aunt learned that the DJ was a former opera singer. So she cold emailed the station, got an email back with an invitation to meet the DJ for coffee. That DJ introduced Camilla to her first vocal coach, and now, today, Camilla is a permanent resident, married to the duck, and singing in the Montreal Opera. Maybe we don't need to over optimize for individual success because we define success more broadly with time together, cheering at hockey games, tears at concerts, starting new ventures, and taking slow walks with friends down by the water. What did two Canadians do whenever they bump into each other? Say sorry. Though it's a well known Canadian trope, there's perhaps a deeper tie there, feeling interwoven with each other, connected to each other. We have time and space to feel like getting by is not just a question of survival, but of making things work together. We are lucky to be able to feel that way, of course, where an apologetic, putting others first reflex isn't just possible, but the norm. But it is. May we never forget how lucky we are. May we never forget how good we have it. So, after my dad parked the station wagon in the driveway, Nina and I headed inside to hang the calendar on that yellow kitchen wall. It was hidden behind December for a month, but soon we'd scroll through the year and fall into beautiful images that helped us feel and remember the vivid texture of our country coming to life. Sit back and feeling. Bright red sun slowly setting over hay bales beside highways. Picnic tables wobbling in front of mirrory lakes. Cold, refreshing smells of freshly flooded ice and glass cleaner in arenas at 6 in the morning. Of wet umbrellas open on boot trays at the dentist office. Of not being able to explain why a toonie is called a toonie. Of dipping hot fries and quarter chicken chunks in chalet sauce. Of piles of splintery hockey sticks in the corner of the garage, of owning way too many ice scrapers, and yet somehow none of them are in your car on the day of the first snowstorm, of walking by a group of kids playing cricket in the park after school, of sitting under blankets and Muskoka chairs complimenting the person who built this campfire, and of not even thinking if we can drink the water out of this tap. We gazed fondly into our country and dreamed of distant trips to far off places, but of course, it's only by leaving that we truly see all the things that make our home so beautiful. Forever curious, forever searching. Gorgeous land, gorgeous people, bright futures, big dreams, shared values. May we never forget how lucky we are. May we never forget how good we have it. Thank you all for this connection over our shared paradise. May we all never forget that Canada, our Canada, is truly awesome. Thank you so much for your time.